notification.
All right.
Cool. Okay, welcome to Life's Not Linear, episode 61. Today I'm interviewing Rahman. Ivan, could you please introduce yourself and give us some background?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Tara. It's a pleasure to be here, so I appreciate that you invited me. So right before we started recording, we had just talked about my background. And so, yeah, my parents are both immigrants, first generation in the United States. Grew up in New York City and Southern California, and then moved out to the Midwest in 2008 at the height of the recession. So I was a student from 2004 to 2008 in San Diego, and first in the family to go to college, first in the family to really try to get higher education and move up. A lot of my family at the time had done blue collar work. We tried our hand at small businesses, but it never really was like anything major. And so when the recession hit in 2008, my student loan lender at the time wasn't giving out loans. And so they kind of were pulling back and nobody really knew what was happening. So it kind of caused me to figure things out. And I actually, kind of going along the lines with this program, decided to leave school. And so I dropped out of UCSD in 2008 and had to figure out where I was going to go from there. So 10 years onwards, I'm now at Northwestern Mutual, where I'm a senior product manager. I help basically create new products in the innovation area of Northwestern Mutual. So I help really challenge what we're doing as a company and explore new frontiers for where we can kind of build new concepts for financial products. So it's really exciting, and I get to work with a really awesome team. So, I love my work, and I love being able to kind of connect people in the city.
Wow, that's awesome. That sounds tough. So I guess going back to when you were in school, were you ever able to go back and finish school, or did you feel
Yeah,
the need
so
to?
that's a great question. I would say for a few years I did not go back. I was trying to figure out how to make an income, and worked with AmeriCorps. Was actually a group that I had joined around that time. I came out to work with the Milwaukee Community Service Corps, which is out of the Hillside housing area in Milwaukee, North 7th and Valete, around there. And so working with them, we worked with a lot of people who were from disadvantaged communities. And I helped basically do a lot of educational programming around hazardous waste operations, cleaning up construction materials, doing some light construction. Solar panel installation was really the big thing at the time. Everything was around renewable energies. And so during that time, it was more about learning and then helping out the community wherever possible and trying to be of service. Later on in my life, I went back to school to Wisconsin Lutheran to finish up my bachelor's, and then went to Carroll University for a master's in graphic communication.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so that's kind of why you decide to stay in Wisconsin with
Yeah.
AmeriCorps and then going to school.
Yeah, and so then I was part of another nonprofit called La Casa de Esperanza, where I was helping out with their energy weatherization program, and then going to school at the same time. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, we have 2 kids, and so at the time we were dating, and so we were long distance, and so we kind of settled in Milwaukee together.
And how was that move from Southern California to Wisconsin during the middle of a recession? Was that difficult?
Yeah, that was an interesting time period. I didn't really have a lot of help from family at the time. They were going through their own issues, and I have younger siblings, and so my parents were kind of focused on raising my siblings at the time. So right after the recession and leaving school, I found myself couch surfing a little bit. I had most of my possessions actually in my vehicle, and that was it. And when I came out to the Midwest, it was actually, I was thinking about going to Chicago first. So I was looking for a sublease that would take cash. Found somebody that was willing to do that, that was taking a break for basically the winter break. And so I had about a month to figure out what to do. And so packed up everything in my vehicle, gave away whatever I couldn't fit, sold off any of the possessions I couldn't carry with me, and used it for gas money on the way out here. My girlfriend at the time and we decided that we wanted to be closer to each other. So yeah, I kind of made my way out here, didn't really know anybody, and had to kind of figure things out from basically start from scratch.
That's crazy. How were you able to even do that? Like just showing up and not really having a lot in your pocket and not knowing people to, couch hop in the Midwest. Like, how were you able to figure that out?
So at the time, Craigslist was helpful, and I found somebody to sublease from through Craigslist.
Still
Um,
helpful.
Still helpful.
Yeah.
And so that was one of those things where I was able to find somebody that way. But honestly, it was, I think the kindness of others. Like in California, one of my best friends, his father let me stay with them for a while, for about a few months, like a month and a half. And then, during that time period, I was doing a lot of networking, trying to like meet other people. And so I went to a networking event around a topic I really had no idea about, and it was renewable energy. And I met somebody who gave me some guidance and told me about some organizations in the Midwest. And so getting leads from them, I was able to contact some, executive directors of nonprofit organizations and reach out and tell them my story, and some of them were willing to listen. And that allowed me to figure out how to find work when I finally got out here. And then, it's been really the kindness of others and networking, and other people have really been helpful on the journey. And so I've really been taking it upon myself to try to be of service to others wherever I can.
Wow. That's I can't imagine how like tired you must have been with just the networking and the ambiguity. But that's amazing to hear that you were able to like network from Southern California to the Midwest and then travel here. And then when you got here, I think you said you worked for a nonprofit. How was that transition from, how was that? I also am wondering kind of that cultural transition from Southern California to the Midwest.
Yeah, that's a
Was it
really
like a
good
culture
question.
shock?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was actually born in New York City in Queens, and I grew up there for the first third of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second third of my life was Southern California. And then I would say the most recent third has been here in the Midwest. So kind of seeing the differences in culture has been interesting. One of the things that I've noted is that in the East Coast, you have a very strong immigrant culture that's embedded in New York City. You have folks from South Asia, Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from South America and Central America. And so that mixture of cultures, that mixture of immigrant beliefs, and not really having a lot in your pocket, it's just kind of part of the culture. Like you figure things out and you work wherever you can to figure things out. And that was kind of imbued in me early on growing up there. And then moving to Southern California, it was a great culture. Everything was much more relaxed, a different way of thinking about things. I think there's a flip side, positive and negative to each region of the country. On the East Coast, that get things done no matter how attitude is great, but then it can also come off as kind of cutthroat sometimes. Whereas in the West Coast, the more relaxed attitude sometimes goes hand in hand with sometimes a little bit more of a superficial culture. And then in the Midwest, I love the sense of community. I love the sense of participation, of goodwill towards one another. But the flip side of that is sometimes, we worry too much about what other people think about us.
Wow. You just like, I've never, I guess, like heard kind of like a high level overview of, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. So that's so interesting to hear you kind of like be able to pinpoint the type of like mentalities that each coast or the Midwest has. It's very interesting. I know the Midwest does not have as like large of an immigrant like population, but you said you still were able to find like a good community here in the Midwest. How did that go?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mentioned that my mother's from a country called Guatemala and my dad's from Bangladesh. And so there is an immigrant community here. But what I find in most immigrant communities is they tend to congregate amongst people who they're familiar with, right? In New York City and LA, it's the same thing, but there's a little bit more of an interaction between them. One thing that was kind of difficult to adjust to is there is a bit of segregation even amongst the immigrant communities here in the Midwest. There were statistics about how Milwaukee is sometimes the most segregated city in the country. And you see that even amongst people of color. And that's unfortunate because there's so much interaction that could happen and so much collaboration that could happen. And I sometimes, I find myself drawn to groups of people that work together across barriers. And so one of the groups that I really have enjoyed partaking in as a mentor has been Icy Stars. And there are people from, the Hmong community, the African American community, the Hispanic community, and they're all kind of working together, and they're building these bonds that span beyond racial profiles, right? And so it's there. It's just you have to kind of look for it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I'm glad you were able to find that. And so, when did you make the leap from working in nonprofits to working at Northwestern Mutual, and how did that transition happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Working in the nonprofit world, I think when I went into it early on, I had at the time a notion that I wanted to help change the world, right? I wanted to be a force for good. And I think we did a lot of good in that work. However, I did find that as I was growing professionally, I did want to experiment and try new things out and learn new things.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see a path forward. And so I decided to go back to school. And I found myself ever drawn to the idea of how we communicate online and how we talk to each other and communicate ideas, abstract concepts. And at the time, social media marketing was kind of the big thing. And it just kind of blew me away how a medium could really change the way we talk to each other and we're able to share ideas. And so I went back to school for marketing and graphic communications. And so that was really like something that I found myself passionate about. I had always kind of been a drawer, a person who liked to sketch. And that was just more of a thing that I never thought was a possible career path. No one I knew in my social network or family network had ever found a career doing creative work and been successful at it. Some people tried to do that as a passion project, but it had never been something that was like a career.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really have a lot of experience in doing that kind of work though. And so, you and I both share a common, I feel like, origin story with the Commons a little bit. And so I remember reading an announcement for the Commons, the very first meeting, and being able to join their information session and then joining as a student, as a grad student at the time. And having that experience and then being able to expose myself to the startup community really helped me build up a portfolio of work that reflected the kind of work that I wanted to do in the future. And it allowed me to start networking with individuals who were actually making a career out of doing creative type stuff. And that was exciting to see. It was a younger generation, people my age, who were basically creating a whole new paradigm within the city. And it allowed me to network a lot with a lot of people who are currently, Joe Peschel and Matt Cordio and others who are in the city doing some really amazing work.
That's great to hear. And that's cool that you're able to still kind of be a part of that more startup, like nonprofit culture as you're also diving into Northwestern Mutual. And so where did you kind of start off with Northwestern Mutual? Like, how did that door open and how was that transition specifically?
Yeah, so at the time I was seeing the convergence between technology and design, especially around website design. And that was always an interest of mine, just kind of working with technology. And so I started doing a lot of self-teaching on how to program websites and create websites. And what I found was that there was a position opening up. A recruiter friend of mine, Aaron Olson, reached out and said that there was a position available at Northwestern Mutual And so I did the interview, and I had kind of a application that I was working on at school, and I shared that with the folks at Northwestern Mutual and kind of shared my passion for this field. And they took a risk on me. You know, I was changing careers, and so I didn't really have a ton of experience, but I did have a lot of passion and drive, and I think they could see that. And so they were willing to share that opportunity. And so I joined as a contractor within marketing, doing digital marketing. And having done some of that for the startup community, for some smaller brands and mom and pop shops, you know, I had some experience, but I grew a lot within the organization. And very quickly, you know, something that I've always like tried to adopt is whenever confronted by chaos or uncertainty, how can I be of service? And I feel like every time I've defaulted back to that, it's allowed me to kind of grow and add value to whichever organization I've been with. And so I honestly tried to take that mentality again, and I was looking for ways I could be of service to others. And that helped me kind of build some bridges within the organization, and I was able to join full time.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you were able to, I'm glad that, you know, somebody was willing to listen and, like you said, kind of take that risk and bring you on. But I really like what you said about whenever you find yourself in a atmosphere of like ambiguity and chaos, you want to give back to others. How have you found yourself, or have you found yourself kind of doing that during these times with the pandemic and the civil rights movement and kind of just the uproar that's going on in the world and in the States? How have you been able to kind of like navigate that ambiguity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, and I'll take a moment to like think about that for a second. You know, I think if I go backwards, and maybe I peel back some of the complexity in that question. When we're confronted by uncertainty, and in essence, we as humans are kind of confronted with a lack of knowing how to survive. We're confronted by a situation that potentially is a threat to us. And I think our human instinct is to bottle up and protect ourselves. And I think that's natural, right? I think that's a natural human tendency. I think the COVID situation in many ways forced all of us to kind of reevaluate like who we are as people though. And because it's not an imminent threat in the sense that it's right there in your face all the time. It feels that like it's there, but it's a little bit further away, you know, especially when it started off on the coasts. I think one of the things that I've taken away is who am I and how am I adding value to other people's lives? Like, how am I being of service? And I think one of the things that I found myself asking is like, what are the ways that I contribute to other people, and what are my strengths? And I feel like that's kind of forced me to evaluate like how I want to contribute to the world, and how do I leverage my voice wherever possible. And so that being said, in these situations, I think the way I've found myself doing that is one of my core strengths is connecting people and ideas. And so I've continued to do that throughout the situation, trying to introduce people to one another and trying to build bridges wherever possible. And so in supporting people who are working in those spaces, like trying to create opportunities for them, that's really been a key facet as to how I've been able to contribute. But I think each individual has to kind of ask themselves, like, how do I add value to people's lives? What are some things that I can do to be of service to others? And I think if we step away from that turtling up feeling, that feeling of having to protect ourselves, we can find ways to add value to other people's lives. And by doing that, open up opportunities for ourselves also.
That's a great point. I think it's kind of like the thing that I've been seeing a lot, and I just watched like a Simon Sinek video on it last week. It was like 2 minutes, but it was like the power of an act of kindness or a compliment. And it was like, he was saying like, you know, you do something nice for somebody else, even if it's just like, you know, picking up something they dropped, and, you know, that makes their day and boosts like their serotonin. And then it makes your day and it boosts your serotonin. And so it's I think it's like it's rewarding on both ends for the person like doing the act of kindness and the person receiving it as well. And I think that's super important to kind of remember as we walk through life. And so you've spoken a lot about your acts of service for others and adding value to others' lives. And while doing this for a lot of your life, how have you also been able to make sure that you are like taking care of yourself and adding value to your life?
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer. I think that's difficult. My wife and I had a daughter a year and a half ago, so she's almost 18 months, and my son is 6 years old right now. And so as a father to young children, I find myself not sleeping a whole lot, and sometimes dealing with work and then transitioning to kids, and finding that balance has been difficult, I would say, for sure. I think one of the things that I've continued to do is try to adopt a very stringent, like I have a very stringent like intake of supplements and other sorts of vitamins, and I try to make sure that at least physically I'm not eating poorly, and I try to make sure my diet is good, and then trying to get at least a walk or two a day, and so that allows me to at least get some outside time. But yeah, there are days where I find myself just inside the office all day and then hanging out and taking care of kids all night, and then repeating that, for a few days in a row, and that's not healthy. And so I recognize that, but I don't think I've been as active as I should be in self-care. So that's 100% on me.
It's should is a strong word that
Yeah.
it's like a nasty word, but
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it's hard. No, not bad. It's like that, like when I feel like when you say I should do this or you should do this, it's like this like
Yeah.
pressure that you put on yourself where it totally makes sense. Like we can always probably do better for ourselves, but also I think in something I've learned, especially in light of like some recent health issues that I've had, is that to make like sustainable changes, it's baby steps. I could set this huge goal of like every day 6 a.m. I'm gonna walk, meditate, blah blah blah. But if I, at least walk today at some point, it doesn't have to be 6 a.m. Like that's better than what I did yesterday. So I try to celebrate the small wins and give myself grace while not also like giving myself too much wiggle room. So that's a tough balance to do, and I can't imagine doing that as a parent. I'm just having to take care of myself. So
No, thank
good
you for
luck.
that. That's very important to keep in mind, and it's definitely a thought that I've had about how do I continue to take care of myself, and it's a lesson I think we have to develop, especially, one of the things that I find challenging is as a person of immigrant background, like my parents never really took care of themselves. Like I didn't see an example of people really like actively taking care of their bodies, of being physically fit. There was always just work. My dad used to drive taxi for a while when we were living in New York City. My mom would work in restaurants, and it was like late night hours, and I would barely see them. And so there was always a notion of like work was very important, and then when we had the small business, it was like 12-hour days. I would help out in the, store, and it was just part of the family business. But self-care was never something that was really well practiced. And I think that's something that I need to kind of start adopting and being an example for my kids moving forward.
It's tough because I can resonate with that, as both my parents are also immigrants, and it's like they're just doing the best with what the knowledge and what they have, and it's kind of like a tunnel vision of, okay, get to America, make money, support my family, this is the American dream. But it's like, how can we pursue this American dream? How can we put food on the table while also not at the expense of our own health? Like my mom and my dad are saying, like, cool, I have retirement, I have this, but I want to enjoy it before I get old or sick and whatnot. So I think it is super important. especially in this culture in America where it's like the grind never stops, team no sleep. I keep hearing these like entrepreneurs that, especially like I'd say entrepreneurs from like teens to their 40s or whatnot, kind of in that age range, that 20-year range, where it's a very like grind, grind, grind mentality. And I'm trying to find a balance with that. Because, like, yes, like you got to hustle, you got to grind. Like, some days are going to be 12 hours, but also it's like, I want to enjoy this and I want to be healthy and I want to enjoy a long life. So, how do I strike that balance of taking care of myself while also like getting shit done, as I would say? So,
Yeah, I think, that's a really good point, and I appreciate that you share that because I've seen that too. And in some ways, I was contributing to that and part of that for a while. And I think for me, a big changing point was having family and starting a family was definitely a turning point. But I think that that comes from a mindset of there's a destination, right? The idea that there is even a destination. And I think one of the lessons to take away is that there really isn't a end place, and that there is what does success even look like from a subjective standpoint? And I was listening to a TED Talk by an author named Kai-Fu Lee, who wrote a book called AI Superpowers. And in the talk, he was talking about how early on in his life, he was working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And that was his like work schedule. And he was constantly working, and he was a pioneer in the field of AI, working at Google and Apple and other companies, and established Google in China. And then he was diagnosed with cancer and had to figure out how to overcome that, and found that he was relying heavily on the love and kindness of others and his family. And he wasn't putting as much effort into that. And so, what does success even look like? At the end of the day, like, what is it that you want to leave behind as a legacy? And I think that's a question each of us have to ask ourselves. And there is no one answer or shape or form of what success even looks like.
it's honestly my favorite question, and I'm so glad you brought it up today because it's something that I started asking myself and like my friends, I'd say maybe junior year of college, where I was still in the mindset of like, okay, GPA, graduate in 4 years. And then I had this like mindset shift. I joined this fellows program, and I was like, oh, okay, there's much more to life than just these numbers and my GPA or like my ACT and stuff like that. And so, because everybody was defining success as like, oh, do you have a job lined up after graduation? What's your starting salary? Like that was the big thing, especially at like kind of at MSOE where it's majority engineers, so we're all kind of in the same boat. And so I really just, oh, it's okay. I love that question of just, especially when going back to that grind culture, like if you were to ask your parents what success looked like, and then if you were to ask yourself, and if you were to ask your peer, I think when asked, everybody has a different answer. But I think when they're kind of going through it, the overall idea of success is like money, a roof over your head. And that is like a part of success. But more importantly, like, I don't know, what brings like intrinsic happiness? What makes you feel like you're impacting and adding value? So I think that's a great question. So with all of your, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, you're good. With all of your like experiences in your transitions, I'm wondering, and through everything that you have learned, what is like a piece of advice that you would want to share to students today?
Yeah, that's a good question about the measure of success being intrinsic versus extrinsic. I think when you were referring to your GPA, your starting salary, your the amount of money or the title that you have, those are all extrinsic validators, right? That's how we find value within ourselves when compared to like some sort of measure that's outside of ourselves. I think one of the biggest lessons to take away for those who are, just starting out in their careers, who have maybe are facing challenges right now going to school, maybe having had dropped out, are what are your intrinsic, measures of success, right? And I think finding that out and defining that is really important. Like, there was a story that I heard of someone who had a 10-year plan, and they put down like what would a perfect day look like in 10 years, right? And I found that to be a really helpful exercise early on in my career. And if you really ask yourselves, like, what would a perfect day look like based on intrinsic measures of success, not extrinsic ones, but intrinsic ones. And that helps us, I think, identify our set of values and identify like what we're willing to stand for, and helps us then define career paths forward. Does this match with who I'm intending to be as a person, or does this not contribute to that? And I think not all opportunities are created equal. Some opportunities allow us to be a better version of ourselves, while others kind of limit that. And we should step away from things that take away from our well-being and our mental health, if they're not contributing to us becoming a better person or a better version of ourselves.
I think that's a really great point. I appreciate that you brought that up, especially with the thing you said about opportunities. Some allow us to be like a better or best version of ourselves, and some don't. And I think when we're making that choice, it is about those intrinsic, like, happiness and that intrinsic value. Again, because I feel like we make a lot of decisions based off extrinsic, like salary, location, that kind of thing. And so if we're able to decide like intrinsically, I think it has a lot more benefit than we realize. It may not be like a monetary benefit, but depending on what your idea of success is, maybe it's better to have more of like an intrinsic, holistic benefit than a monetary benefit. So it depends.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing with us today and opening up about your journey and your growing up on the East Coast and then the West Coast and then the Midwest, and all the leaps you've taken. I really appreciate you kind of sharing and reflecting with me and sharing with our students.
Well, I appreciate you contacting me, and I appreciate being a part of this. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this journey with you.